ambulance? Is the patient breathing?
No, they're not. There's 2 people here, nothing.
I just can't believe that another human being is capable of doing things like that.
They're both in their 80s, I think, but they're both like in the blood, and I think they're both dead.
There was blood absolutely everywhere. It was like something from some sort of horrible Hollywood film.
If the lady's got a bag on her head, it's suspicious. We do need the police here.
How can you put that level of violence on someone so elderly that can't fight back?
Things like this don't happen in Shirebrook.
They're sending shivers through the whole community.
Potentially we could have a serial killer around.
Can they real, please? Oh, God.
Ready? Yeah, this one.
Once they got their suspect, they could arrest him.
The level of violence that he'd used, he was a threat to anybody.
Please, stay where you are.
Just to confirm, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Freda Walker between 14th and 15th of January, the attempted murder of Kenneth Walker. Right.
This is a massive turning point in the investigation.
Later on in court.
He carried out a really savage attack on this couple. It really was absolutely vile.
Shirebrook, Derbyshire. A traditional market town of barely 10,000 people.
It's a small community, really. The mines closed in the 80s, changed the dynamics of it greatly. But it is the type of town, even all these years later, that people look after each other. They all know each other. There's not many communities like that these days, but this is one of them. It's a town that's very traditional. It has people who are born there, raised there, tend to live there. It's very proud.
In the heart of this tight-knit community, on Station Road, live pensioners Ken and Freda Walker.
They were just really well-known, well-liked. They were both in their late 80s. They'd lived in the house in Station Road for 60 years. I first met Ken because he was an active member of the town council. Very, very well respected in the town, as was Freda.
They met each other at the dance, like 22, Freda was. Oh, she loved dancing, always immaculately dressed and whatever. She was just beautiful inside, out.
She'd do anything for anybody. She'd got a heart of gold. We never, ever had a cross word. This street, very close. Very close. We always have been.
But barely days after Ken's 88th birthday, life on Station Road is about to change forever. It's Friday afternoon, and Freda stops by to see neighbour Lynn and another friend, Richard.
On the Friday night, we were having a cup of coffee, and it started to get a bit dark. And Richard says, "I'll just walk you down the street then, Freda." And that was at 6 o'clock.
The last contact anybody had with Freda or Ken that day was at 6:30, just before Emmerdale was due to begin. They had a neighbour to whom they were extraordinarily close, who planned to come round, telephoned and said, look, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to tuck up in my pyjamas. My TV's working again now. I'll watch it here. And then she sought to telephone Freda back after, was to discuss, really, no doubt, what had happened in Emmerdale and how thrilling the plot had been. But there was no reply to that.
Next morning, however, Ken and Freda's home seems eerily quiet.
She was supposed to ring me that Saturday morning. Didn't ring me. This is strange because Freda's normally on time. Then I got a gut feeling something was wrong. So I kept ringing in the house. And no answer.
Nobody answered. So I says, well, do you want me to nip down? Oh, yeah, if you don't mind. And put my boots on and went. And paper was in letterbox, milk were on step. I'm knocking, shouting, Freda, so, you know, Freda. Look, couldn't see anything. I thought I'd somebody fell.
And then she walked down this alleyway here to the back of the house. And as you can see, there's a wooden gate there. They went through that gate. And on this occasion, the back door, I think it was closed, but it was unlocked. So the neighbour let herself in.
So I just knocked on the door, stepped in, shouted, it's only me, Freda. And I just looked to my right and Freda were laid face down. And I looked in the room and I could just see Ken's legs. I just thought something terrible's happened here.
Judith dashes outside to flag down a passerby for help.
I rung police and ambulance.
Ambulance, is the patient breathing?
No, they're not. There's two people in. I think they're both...
Okay, tell me exactly what's happened.
I've come round and I didn't touch them. I think they're both dead. There's two people, a man and a lady. They're both in their 80s, I think, but they're both laid there in the blood. And
okay.
She's got a bag on her head and a tie around her wrist. Oh, yeah, please. I've told police as well, please. You must get the man. I can't, I think he's Ken.
Okay, so I do understand.
If the lady's got a bag on her head, it's suspicious. We do need the police here. Can they hurry up, please?
We are en route, okay. We're running on the highest category. We are coming on lights inside. It's okay.
Oh, God.
I just can't seem to forget it. In your lifetime, would you ever think you'd see something like that, you know?
I was expecting it to be quite a quiet day, and then the call came across saying that a body had been found, which is an incredible tragedy. And changed everything for the community.
Derbyshire police officers race straight to Ken and Freda's home.
The emergency services, both in terms of paramedics and the police, were on the scene extraordinarily quickly.
There's like something from some sort of horrible Hollywood film, unfortunately. Basically, both Ken and Freda, they'd had the legs and the hands hog-tied, which is awful. I believe Freda had a plastic bag over her head and she'd been gagged. So it looked like, to everybody that was there, a scene of torture, which I'm sure it probably was.
And there was blood absolutely everywhere at the scene. It must have been just the most horrific thing for anyone to have witnessed.
The elderly couple's bodies had been mercilessly beaten in a violent attack. Station Road soon turns into a crime scene.
The police tape is put up, entry to the scene is closely monitored, and indeed it's recorded in a log. And anybody entering the scene has to wear a hazmat suit and foot coverings and hand coverings so that they don't contaminate the scene.
I drew the blinds and I thought, whatever's going off out here? There were police cars, ambulances and everything. The street was being cordoned off. I thought something horrible's gone on.
Freda's niece, Sandra, however, is tragically unaware of the unfolding events.
Eventually, I rung one of her best friends. I said, where's Freda? She don't, you know? And I just said it. She's dead, isn't she? And she said, yes. Freda's been murdered. Couldn't believe it. Devastated. I'm getting upset now.
Police immediately launch an investigation.
Initially, they thought that both people were dead, but Ken had actually survived, incredibly, very seriously injured. So the ambulance took Ken away to a hospital, and then basically the police are dealing with a murder scene.
The couple's friends and family struggled to take in the news.
He was so badly beaten. It was unbelievable. How can you put that level of violence on someone so elderly that can't fight back? It beggars belief, doesn't it?
I just can't believe that another human being is capable of doing things like that. I just can't take it in.
Police need to establish who would want to harm these two pillars of the local community.
The difficulty for them was that there was no obvious immediate motive. There was no rational explanation as to why anyone should have wanted to have attacked this elderly couple in their own home at all.
Things like this don't happen in Shirebrook. We were concerned if there was somebody out there that they were capable of this.
And the race is on to find a killer before it's too late.
It could happen again. Potentially we could have a serial killer on our hands.
In Shirebrook, Derbyshire, the community's reeling from the violent attack on a couple in their 80s, found bound, gagged, and left for dead. Former District Council Chairman Ken Walker is fighting for his life in hospital. His wife Freda is discovered lifeless in a pool of blood.
The crime scene was horrific. Freda was found lying on the kitchen floor. She'd had her head covered by numerous coverings. Her hands and feet were tied together with what ultimately was discovered to be bindings that had been taken from her own sewing box. She was covered in blood. She died as a result of head injury and blocked airway, and the airway was physically blocked by the wrappings that had been placed in her mouth to try and gag her. She had numerous lacerations around her head where she'd been kicked or punched. This was not just one blow, it was repeated blows to Freda.
The crime scene was particularly violent. There were large quantities of blood throughout the downstairs of the property. There was blood visible on opposite walls within the living room and within the kitchen area, which indicated that there had been a sustained attack taking place.
It was truly one of the most violent attacks on an elderly person that you could possibly imagine. The house was immediately made a crime scene, as well as the streets and frontage around those properties, to see what evidence we could recover. They call it the golden hour. It's the first time when you start knocking on people's doors. We start getting detectives in from around the East Midlands to start making those inquiries.
The incident room was quite chaotic, organised chaos. Lots of people there, key roles been given out.
It was apparent almost immediately that Ken and Freda had no enemies. There was no motive initially for this attack. It was totally out of the blue, which was, I think, why it shocked the community so much.
We had no idea who was involved in this, so you're obviously concerned for the community.
It really is a shocking event, especially for an elderly couple. I mean, they're both mid-80s. It should never have happened. The fact that it did happen sent, shivers through the whole community. The residents in the locality were frightened.
Total shock. Nothing like that had ever happened, and particularly when you look at Ken and Freda, you could not imagine why anyone would want to attack them. at all.
It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. She didn't deserve that. She did not deserve to die like that.
It don't seem real, does it? It's not Freda. It's not Auntie Freda in her own home by a cooker. And that's where she was murdered.
While police try to track down a violent killer, news has spread and the national media has descended upon this quiet town.
I think once the details of the killing were made public, it really sent shockwaves through Shirebrook. This was a town that nothing like this ever happened. So to hear such violent details of such a well-known couple, I think there was definitely fear in the town, without a shadow of a doubt.
I was inundated with people coming to the door, BBC News, ITV News. I says, all I can tell you is Freda was my best friend for over 50 years. And I said, now please go away.
With tensions running so high in Shirebrook, it's up to the local beat sergeant, Mark, to rally the community.
We didn't have a suspect. There were no immediate eyewitnesses. So my job as a safe neighbourhood sergeant really is to manage the fears and the concerns of the community, to offer reassurances. And the last thing we need is fear. What we want is people, first of all, to be reassured. And secondly, the great thing about Shirebrook is it is a close-knit community. The community will do everything they can to resolve stuff like this. Detectives and people from my team will start doing house-to-house inquiries. If you look up there, you can see a CCTV camera. We're looking for people who perhaps saw something that was suspicious. We're trying to identify people that have got cameras and may have recorded critical evidence.
But an initial trawl of local CCTV cameras doesn't throw up any leads.
It was Friday night. People are out, going out, coming back, walking the dogs. There was movement all over the angles of CCTV we had, but we just didn't have enough information in the initial stages to identify which one of those was our suspect.
With CCTV proving fruitless, police hope finding a motive for the attack will lead them to their killer.
So the initial thoughts were that potentially this could be relating to a burglary that had gone wrong. Some boxes had been opened in one of the upstairs bedrooms and had been laid out on the bed. We thought that perhaps this may have been that they were looking for money or jewellery within the property.
Ken was very well off. Ken looked after his money apart from his obsession. He could not walk past a betting station. He was extremely tight with his money. Freda used to tell me that very often things that she wanted, she had to pay for herself.
Delving into the couple's finances, police discover that 2 months before the attack, Ken made a massive withdrawal from his bank account, £30,000 in cash.
It soon came to light that they had a substantial amount of money within the house. This became the focus of the investigation. Was it because somebody had found out about that money and had gone to try and take it? It was stored all over the house. It was in cupboards, it was in pockets, it was in boxes.
Forensic investigators scour the crime scene in the hope of finding DNA left behind by the suspected burglar turned killer.
We sent off items like the outer pillowcase that had been put over Freda's head and some of the bindings. We'd identified these as being high potential, that we'd potentially get a DNA profile from them relating to our suspect.
Yeah, it was frustrating. They came back with no DNA profile.
We were now a couple of days into the investigation and still nobody has a name or a potential idea of who our perpetrator is in this case.
In the initial stages of this investigation, it was an absolute whodunit.
So detectives focus on another discovery made at the crime scene. But this one has really caught their eye.
A baseball cap had been found on the floor in the dining room.
It looked unusual where it was, and that was recovered from where Ken was tied.
It was not something that Ken or Freda would wear.
We thought there was potential for it to have been dropped by an offender.
The cap is rushed off to the forensics lab. Next day, it's a result.
Once we got this DNA hit, the suspect's DNA was on the national DNA database. It feels like scoring a goal at Wembley.
Their prime suspect, 33-year-old Romanian national, Vasil Culier.
That was a breakthrough that the investigation team needed. People are working 20 hours a day, so it was a massive lift.
As soon as we got the hit, we immediately started planning to make that arrest.
In Shirebrook, Derbyshire, police are on the hunt for a brutal killer. 86-year-old Freda Walker has been beaten to death in her home. Her 88-year-old husband, Ken, has also been violently attacked and is fighting for his life. A cap left at the scene has been linked by DNA to 33-year-old Vasil Culier. With the suspect now identified, a bloodied fingerprint found on the kitchen door is put under the microscope.
By running them on the database, when they were suspect checked against Vasil Culier, they came back as a match. So we now have a DNA profile and also fingerprints in blood at our crime scene. So at the time of the assault, when the blood was wet, so it was an absolute breakthrough to get his name.
Culier was known to us previously, had been arrested once before. But other than that, we knew very little about him.
He had one previous conviction for assault on his previous girlfriend, which was why he was on the DNA database. We needed now to get an arrest team, because of the level of violence that he'd used on Station Road, he was a threat to anybody, so it had to be an armed arrest.
Ready? Yeah, this one.
Armed officers forced entry to the address.
Please, stay where you are. Stay where you are. Behind your back.
The firearms team went in. He was in his bedroom. He was arrested, handcuffed.
Hands on that wardrobe now. Hands on that wardrobe. Hands on the door.
What's your name?
Vasil.
Sorry?
Vasil.
Vasil.
Yes.
Okay, sit up.
His demeanour was quite strange, because he didn't seem that bothered.
Right. Just to confirm, mate, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Freda Walker between 14th and 15th of January. The attempted murder of Kenneth Walker. Right, so you don't have to take anything around. Thank you very much. Just the later on in court.
He was then taken to Ripley Police Station, where he was processed.
I was there waiting for him with two colleagues. It was a strange one, really, because of the level of violence inflicted on Ken and Freda. I was expecting quite a big person. Me and my colleague were like, have we got the right person here? Because he was quite slight in height and in weight, quite wiry.
Back at Culier's home, police scour his bedroom for evidence.
There was a number of other people living there. They were treated as witnesses and removed from the address, but now we had a second crime scene to process that would prove pivotal to the investigation. We found documents in there that identified that he was in debt and he had a gambling problem.
He was in debt to the tune of about £11,000. As soon as he got paid on the Friday, he was broke on the Saturday.
So it was starting to build a motive for why he may have wanted to take Ken and Freda's money.
And we seized over 30 pairs of shoes, because the pattern of the footwear that was recovered at the crime scene in blood, both in the kitchen, in the alleyway and in the upstairs bathroom, were a peculiar design. It wasn't a design that was known to us. So all shoes were taken from the house.
We found some plimsoll trainers and a coat. Both those were found to have his blood on them.
Whilst these are sent off for forensic analysis, back at the station, Coulier is interrogated.
Coulier had decided to go no comment to all the questions.
The clock is now ticking. We've now got initially 24 hours to try and get an account and get in a position to get a charging decision from CPS for him.
News of the arrest is the talk of the town.
They'd actually got him in custody. Grateful that they'd found him so quickly.
People were so relieved that someone had been arrested. The ill feeling towards that person is unbelievable, which is understandable. You know, a lot of people hurt by it.
Not exactly happy. I just wanted to wring his neck.
With Coulier refusing to talk, police need to build a case to charge him. They seize his Audi and, using his number plate, can retrace his every move on the night of the attack, using ANPR traffic cameras.
It gave us ANPR showing that he came into the village and when he left the village. Ultimately, it gave us something to look for on the CCTV. It gave us a target to follow, and it was shown through painstaking work and hours of viewing CCTV that the car had been driving around on Station Road.
The CCTV builds a picture of Coulier's movements in the hours leading up to the murder.
The 14th of January was a day off for Vasil Coulier. He'd spent the day gambling. It was before 8:30 when he drew £280 out of a cash machine in Shirebrook. He then immediately went to the Betfred, where he played on the fruit machines for some time. He went to 2 more bookmakers to feed his gambling habit before returning back into Shirebrook. It was at that point that the car was seen repeatedly circling around the Station Road area.
It's spotted chillingly close to the home of Ken and Freda Walker.
Throughout the day from 1:30, he did 4 recce's in and around Station Road in that vehicle.
Later on in the afternoon, the car was abandoned. It was then when Coulier decided to go on foot and start recceing the address even closer. And as time went on, as CCTV was checked further.
Crucially, it gave us what clothing he was wearing at the time, and he had quite a distinctive green parka on with a fur hood that showed Coulier wearing that green parka, which is recovered from his bedroom at the scene outside Station Road. We tracked him, and he did a further 4 recce's, again, 2 left hand, 2 right hand side of the house. So it was clear that he was deciding when and how he was going to get into that house.
About 6:30 in the evening, he disappeared off the CCTV and didn't reappear on the CCTV until about 9:15, for the best part of 3 hours.
Enough time, police suspect, for Coulier to carry out his brutal attack. And before long, the DNA results are back from the bloodstains on his parka and trainers.
Both were found to have blood on relating to Freda Walker.
It's the breakthrough that you're looking for. It starts a chain of events that you can build upon to build that case. Once you've got that information, you know you've got probably the right man.
And the trainers reveal even more incriminating evidence.
The sole prints from the trainers were unique.
There was a small stone trapped in the sole of the shoe.
And that could clearly be seen by the experts within the blood-stained footprints on the kitchen floor. That led the expert to be able to conclusively say that those footprints were made by those pair of trainers.
He was happy to conclude that it was the exact shoe.
On top of that, within Coulier's boot of his car was a fluorescent vest that was found to have blood on. It was something that he put on after the offence had happened and walked back to the car with. We may never know why he did that, other than to change his appearance from when he went into the address.
And it came back that some of the blood that was found on the high-vis jacket came back to Freda. So again, we had another link back to the scene.
His fingerprints were in blood at the address. His DNA was on the bindings of Ken and Freda. His DNA was on the hat. Freda's blood was on his clothes. When you marry all those together, you had an enormously strong forensic case.
And technology finally tips the case against Coulier.
I think one of the more interesting pieces of evidence that helped to build this case was the radio frequency survey, and it will help us tell if there's any mobile phone activity in that area. Fortunately, there had been a text message from a gambling advert to Coulier's phone, which pinged it. It showed he was there at 6:30, which put him within yards of the address at the time that the offence was about to begin.
Today, a man has been charged for the murder of 86-year-old Freda Walker and the attempted murder of 88-year-old Kenneth Walker.
I think there was probably a feeling of relief in Shirebrook, certainly when they were charged, because that means that this person who's committed this absolutely horrific crime is off their streets.
With feelings running so high, the scene's set for a dramatic murder trial.
The forensic evidence was overwhelming.
It was never going to be a case where he could say, "It's not me, you've got the wrong man."
Burglar turned killer, Vasil Coulier, has been charged with the murder and attempted murder of Freda and Kenneth Walker in the Derbyshire town of Shirebrook. He's been traced on CCTV close to their home before and after their brutal beating. After Coulier's arrest, evidence seized from his home overwhelmingly links him to the crime scene.
He carried out a really savage attack on this couple. There was no way that Freda was going to survive such a savage assault, and it's really a miracle that Ken didn't die in the same attack. It really was absolutely vile.
In the build-up to his trial, Coulier finally offers his side of the story in a defence statement.
Coulier always admitted that he was the person who went into the house, but he never intended to kill them when he went in there. He just wanted the money.
He was trying to claim that the injuries caused to Freda and Ken were not intentional, that he didn't intend to cause them very serious harm. He offered to plead to manslaughter and wounding to Ken, but that wasn't an acceptable result for this investigation. The evidence was clear and we were going to go to trial for murder.
8 months after the violent attack, Coulier finally faces justice at Derby Crown Court.
He pleaded not guilty to the allegations of murder, attempted murder and causing grievous bodily harm with intent.
With Coulier's victims being pensioners in their late 80s, tensions in the courtroom are running high.
This inevitably was going to attract and did attract a huge amount of media interest from the very outset.
On that morning of the trial, it was packed in there. As you'd imagine, you had all of the national media in there. This was a huge story. This was a couple who were in their 80s who'd been attacked by a man who no one really knew anything about. It was crackling in there, it really was. And I think a lot of that was down to the fact that there was so much interest in this. Far more importantly, the police needed to get some justice.
All eyes are on Coulier as he hears the case against him.
My first impression of him was, isn't he small? Physically, whilst he was relatively well built, he wasn't a large man at all. He was quietly spoken.
He didn't look particularly menacing. He didn't look particularly frightening. He was just a skinny, dark-haired guy who didn't seem like the sort of person that would force his way into the home of a couple and kill one and beat one to within an inch of his life.
It was unbelievable. I would have expected somebody who had committed an offence like that at times just to look down, but no. He just looked in front of him, no emotion whatsoever on his face.
The prosecution paints the profile of a desperate man. On the day of the murder, Coulier is £11,000 in debt.
Having gone to the bookmakers that morning and lost his wages, he needed money, and he needed money for himself, and he needed money to gamble.
So he homed in on Ken and Freda, whom he discovered had £30,000 stashed around their home.
Precisely how Vasile Coulier came to be aware of this remains a mystery.
It was quite well known, certainly amongst a small circle of friends that Ken and Freda trusted, that they kept quite a lot of money in the house.
He said that he had heard about it in general conversation in a Polish store earlier that day. The police were always very sceptical about this, as was I. There were any other number of neighbours that knew about this and could equally, in all innocence, have just mentioned it in passing. Somehow it was information that came Coulier's way, and somehow he managed to put enough information together to give him enough of a location to go and have a look.
The prosecution presents to court their theory on what happened next.
That he'd opened the door to let the cat in or out, and he'd taken his opportunity and forced his way in then.
Then a confrontation took place, as Coulier demanded Ken's cash.
The difficulty was that Ken, who was suffering with dementia, had a habit of not remembering where he put his money, and so the police surmised, and we presented the case at trial, that he grew increasingly angry regarding Ken's inability to remember where the money was.
Police believe Coulier tried to beat Ken and Freda into submission before gagging and tying them up.
No doubt in my mind that Ken and Freda would have wanted to put up a fight against Vasile Coulier, which is what then made him do the most sadistic things that he could.
Freda was tortured to death in the kitchen in front of Ken in the hope that he would give up where the money was.
These people were in their 80s. He was a young man. He didn't need to tie them up. He didn't need to beat them the way he did, all for a sum of money, which he ultimately didn't even achieve in taking with him.
Next, it's Coulier's turn to give his version of events.
When Coulier took the stand, he obviously had to accept that he was present, but he did everything he could to try and minimise any harm that came to Ken and Freda. So he provided an account which effectively relied on self-defence.
Coulier claims he didn't force his way into Ken and Freda's, but snuck in silently and waited for them to go to bed.
He said that where he hid was the downstairs toilet. He was discovered when Freda came into that room, and Freda shouted and started to assault him. And then Ken came to assist Freda, and that's when Ken got his injuries and fell down whilst he was trying to assault Coulier. It was just nonsense.
He tries to explain away Freda's fatal injuries.
It was laughable in places. He claimed to have slipped on a drink that was spilt within the scuffle.
He slipped and fell on Freda as part of the fight that he had with the two of them, because they weren't going to give up their money without a fight. And after that happened, he realised quite what trouble he was in, and so he decided to tie them both up.
But the prosecution blows apart Coulier's claims of self-defence by markings found next to Freda's body.
The forensic scientists gave evidence of directions of blood spots on the skirting board, and there were directions of travel that indicated separate blows into wet blood from different directions. That was then highly suggestive of kicks into wet blood.
This proves Freda was lying defencelessly on the ground when she was pummeled in the head.
Blood pattern analysis experts could interpret the mark to show that Freda had been kicked or stamped on at least 3 times within the kitchen.
And Coulier really comes unstuck on the suffocating coverings found around Freda Walker's face.
Fundamentally, he had to explain how it was that Freda's head had 6 separate sets of wrappings around it. 2 were black bin liners and a ligature in her mouth as well. He said throughout the trial that he was not responsible for that and that he wasn't responsible for gagging Ken either. This was absurd.
But the forensic evidence rips Coulier's claims apart.
His fingerprints were on a roll of bin liners literally inches away from Freda's head. The scientist was able to tell us that the bin liner used to cover Freda's head was the last one to be taken off the roll.
Coulier was trying to distance himself from those head coverings because that was the cause of death.
He could offer no explanation as to how his fingerprints had got onto the roll of bin liners. He was basically saying that when he left, there was no face coverings on.
So clearly someone must have done it after he'd left them. Now, who would walk into a house where a couple are lying, bound and gagged, one dead, the other one dying, and decide, I'm going to put a bag over these people's heads and then I'm going to leave? It begs belief, and it just shows what a liar Coulier is.
After 2 weeks of evidence, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
By the time the evidence finished, and by the time we'd heard Coulier's version of events, the only thought in my mind was how quickly are the jury going to come back with a guilty verdict.
Unfortunately, I couldn't be there on verdict day. I spent a very nervous day, never leaving my phone.
I still can't stand the moment when a jury returns their verdict. It is still a moment, one way or the other, of incredibly high drama and tension.
The jury reappears in just 2 hours.
They convicted Coulier of the murder of Freda Walker and of causing grievous bodily harm with intent to her husband Ken.
Although found not guilty on the attempted murder charge, Coulier's overall conviction is a triumph for the team.
They had no other conclusions that they could bring, so fortunately the right verdict was reached very quickly. A verdict that we were all satisfied and happy with.
3 days later, it's Coulier's sentencing. And Freda's friend, Judith, who made the gruesome discovery of the couple, is called to the stand.
So I wrote a victim impact statement, it was called, and I just wanted to, to read it out really. And it's a terrible thing to think somebody could just do it. I just can't understand it.
Vasile Coulier is jailed for 34 years, with no chance of parole.
I don't think anyone was expecting it to be quite that long, but the long and the short of it is what he deserves for what he did. This was brutal, this was savage, and it deserves this type of tariff.
There was some justice, not just for Ken and Freda, but for Shirebrook as a whole.
But tragically, by the time of the conviction, Ken would never hear the fate of his attacker.
He never recovered enough to realise what had happened to Freda, and he died shortly before the trial, and so never got to fully hear this verdict against Coulier.
And the brutal crime has left its mark on the close-knit community of Shirebrook.
It's not a relief, is it? Because my auntie's still not with me.
Well, he'll never get what he deserves, Never. Say glad it's all over, but it'll never be over.
we all obviously hoped she would turn up safe and well.
It's such a big lie. Why would he make that up?
It was so horrific. She was very talented, beautiful, and then you question everything.
A con man, a charlatan who was adept at getting sex and money out of women and who ruins women's lives in order to further his own gains.
The whole thing was shocking because we obviously thought we knew these people, and then all of a sudden you find that you don't actually know anyone at all.
Murders don't happen in sleepy little country villages.
Nestled in the rolling Sussex hills lies the picture postcard village of Duddleswell.
Duddleswell is a small village, nearly the highest point in Sussex.
It's an ancient hunting ground. It's a mixture of some wooded areas and open heathland. We're up quite high, so yeah, it gets the weather.
Duddleswell is in the Ashdown Forest, which is the inspiration for the children's author A.A. Milne and his Winnie the Pooh books.
It's tiny. It's a sort of blink and you miss it. It's sort of a few houses and the tea rooms down the road.
Probably 200 or 300 people, I'd imagine. Probably more sheep and horses than people.
It's close to, say, the city, London. So it's in the middle of everywhere and in the middle of nowhere, to be honest.
The best described as sleepy. In the summer, tourists come through and the tea rooms do a good business, but basically it's a backwater.
There's not a great deal that goes on out here.
But in 2008, something out of the ordinary did happen, and life in this idyllic village changed forever.
Hello, darling. It's me. Wherever you are, just please get in contact.
Local villager David Chenery Wickens is trying to reach his wife Diane, who seems to have disappeared.
I'm at home, wishing you were here with me now.
He reports her missing to the police.
Please, Diane. I'm going frantic here. Please phone me. Love you.
Every missing person case is treated on its own merits. So there will always be circumstances taken into account. Was this usual behaviour? Was there something about the individual that made him or her vulnerable? And according to all of those circumstances, we would grade a missing person either as high, medium or low risk. With Diane, it wouldn't necessarily have been treated as a high-risk missing person and wouldn't have garnered as many resources as perhaps somebody else would have done.
There must be hundreds of missing people in Sussex, and they crop up from time to time. Often there's a very innocent explanation. Often somebody disappears because they want to disappear and try a new life elsewhere.
News of Diane's disappearance shocks the local community, where she's a popular villager.
Diane was very pretty and very, very articulate, very well spoken and very interesting.
Lovely, really lovely, quite quiet.
But the rather reserved Diane hides a high-flying, glittering career, bringing a spot of Tinseltown to the Sussex backwater.
Diane was a hugely popular, super talented makeup artist for the BBC. She had won an Emmy, which is the top American award for television. She'd been nominated for a BAFTA, which is the British equivalent. And she'd worked on hugely prestigious series such as Pride and Prejudice, Casualty, League of Gentlemen. She was multi-skilled, and here she was at the midst of her stellar career.
It's husband David, though, who seems to attract the spotlight.
He was quite An imposing character, quite gregarious, quite larger than life. I think David was the dominant partner, a lot more outgoing.
He's also a star in the kitchen, where he volunteers at the nearby railway centre, the Lavender Line.
Very good cook, dished it up very nicely as well. Was charming to the customers, very pleasant, easy-going person.
David's other talents are otherworldly. He's an accredited spiritualist who prays with like-minded souls in the local community.
Our first meeting, he was our medium for the evening and took the service for us. He was very, very pleasant, very professional.
He did style himself very much as a reverend. David frequently appeared in the pub with his dog collar on. We didn't see him very much not in his dog collar.
Seemed to be no end to his talents. They just seemed a lovely couple. They got along well with nearly everybody, it would seem. They always seemed very normal, just normal.
Police delve into Diane's seemingly normal life. Then 6 days after her disappearance, appeals are made for her whereabouts in the local press.
Living in Sussex as I do, when the alarm went out that there was a missing person, this is not unusual in any part of the country, but the person who was missing was very unusual. To have such a super talented makeup artist at the BBC suddenly disappear seemingly off the face of the earth was a very good story.
Sometimes there will be an investigation which causes concern, which does hit the media interest and the public interest. Diane would have been one of them because it was so out of character. No obvious reasons for Diane to have disappeared. So that type of investigation would have gathered a lot of public and a lot of media interest.
The national media descends on this quiet Sussex backwater.
The first time I heard about Diane going missing was when I just came indoors with my husband and the front door knocked and there was a newspaper reporter talking, telling us that Diane had gone missing, and it really upset us.
It was everywhere that she'd gone missing. It was in the local news, it was on the radio that she was missing. It was, everyone was talking about it.
From that point onwards, there was a great deal of interest in the community. It did become a point of conversation very quickly.
A lot of the things that people were saying was that they just thought that she'd gone away, left him.
Her devastated husband, David, confides he fears the same.
He thought that's what she'd done and that she'd gone to London. I do remember hearing that a few times from a few different sources, that she'd gone to London, but no one actually knew where she was, which was strange.
Detectives dig deeper into Diane's last known movements.
Chenry Wickens claimed to the police they had both taken the train from East Grinstead Station up to London because Diane had a pre-arranged meeting at the BBC. And they agreed to meet afterwards at her hairdresser's. And Chenry Wickens told the police that he was there at the rendezvous and she didn't turn up.
Diane's mobile is traced to London on the day she disappeared. But something in her phone records doesn't seem right.
Text messages had been sent from Diane's phone to some of her friends. Now, this was an immediate matter of suspicion to the police, because if someone had deliberately gone missing in order to start a new life somewhere else, they would not contact friends in this way. So was this some sort of pretext to try and send the Sussex police off on a wild goose chase?
More suspicious was the fact her messages were signed Di, not her usual sign-off, Diane. Police suspect someone else could be using Diane's phone. And there's an unexplained mystery about her last known location.
The police established that there had been no pre-arranged meeting at the BBC, so she had no reason to go there.
Detectives need to trace where Diane went after saying her goodbyes to David at Kensington Station. So they scour the CCTV.
Ideally, the CCTV would start to be reviewed from the point that the two separated. So that would be the start point. Where did Diane go? Did she meet somebody else? Can we track her through Shepherd's Bush, White City and what have you?
They started going through all the CCTV footage and they couldn't find her anywhere.
Actually, Diane was never in Shepherd's Bush. And at that point, you would start working backwards along her journey.
Police tried to trace Diane to where the couple's journey began.
They also had CCTV taken at East Grinstead railway station showing Henry Wickens getting on the train alone. No sign of his wife.
It's such a big lie and so easily disprovable. Why would he make that up?
Duddleswell, East Sussex. Spiritualist David Chenery Wickens has been arrested and questioned about his wife's disappearance. He claims Diane accompanied him to London for a meeting. But CCTV shows him making the trip alone.
The police may well have had deep reservations about Chenery Wickens. They knew that there had been no pre-arranged meeting at the BBC, so there was no reason why she would have gone there.
A search starts at the couple's cottage, but this leads to a dead end. So detectives turn back to the CCTV.
When they confronted Chenery Wickens with the CCTV, which proved that he had lied in his explanation, he immediately apologised and said, I'm so sorry, yes, I did lie to you then, but that's because I was embarrassed because my wife decided that she was going to leave me, that she was so ashamed of our debts and so ashamed that our marriage was failing that she decided to leave me. So I invented this story. Terribly sorry.
Once he'd been arrested, it was big news locally, and the local paper was all over it. When we went out with David and Diane down to the pub, it was good fun. There's no signs of any issues. And then when you actually find out that something like this has happened, it's like a shock, particularly from a sleepy community of a few hundred people in a fairly affluent area. You just don't expect it.
Once his wife had suddenly gone missing, they thought, maybe he has something to do with this.
But with no firm proof David's behind the disappearance, 4 days after his arrest, he's released.
David was bailed pending the investigation. Effectively, what you had here was a no-body murder investigation. Clearly, the police suspected that Diane was dead because the arrest was made and he had been arrested on suspicion of that. Proving that a murder occurred and that David was responsible without a body would have been incredibly difficult.
The police were in a quandary. They could not prove that she had not left him and had disappeared wanting to start a new life. It was impossible to prove something like that, or disprove something like that.
The police need to have control, and sometimes that's giving somebody enough rope, if you like, to hang themselves. Sometimes that control is sitting back and watching what happens. So that control is sometimes just space.
Police had to step up inquiries around the village and spreading in a circle outwards in a sort of search. But it's such a rural area, it's such a massive amount of land to cover, it was virtually an impossible task. And with a manpower shortage that Sussex Police had at that time, it was not the best use of the time. It really turned into a waiting game.
Detectives put the couple's marriage under the microscope. They speak to friends, family and acquaintances, trawling way back to when Diane and David first met. And they discover the respectable spiritualist reverend isn't what he seems.
It seems that Chenery was working as a driver in a delivery company, and amongst his routes was to deliver to the BBC. So it seems likely that this is how they met, and he had at that time some skill or interest in reading tarot cards, and it may well be that this is how they first met, and that she then fell under his spell. She'd had a previous boyfriend, which was very emotionally disturbing breakup, so she was in a very vulnerable state when she met Chenery, and they embarked on this whirlwind romance. He was slightly older than her, that she could trust as a rock in her life. Within a matter of weeks of her meeting Chenery, she had moved Chenery into her Battersea flat. Now he arrived with all his worldly goods and possessions in a carrier bag. To move into a nice Battersea flat was clearly an upgrade on anything he'd had before. That was the moment, I think, that he decided that Diane was a keeper.
And in no time, the couple decide to tie the knot.
There were huge red flags flying all around the wedding and the day of the wedding in the eyes of Diane's family. First, when they found out that he'd arrived and moved in with just a carrier bag's worth of his worldly goods, which suggested he must have a dubious past, shall we say, to say the least. Secondly, he couldn't find a single man to be best man. He had no male friends that he was willing to put forward. And so one of Diane's friends had to step in.
By the time they make the move to Duddleswell, the ex-lorry driver David has been enjoying his newfound wealth with Diane.
She had the financial input into the relationship. It was certainly her money that kept the house, kept the cars, and I think financially he contributed very little to the relationship. His relationship with Diane, even though they were married, there was a side to his relationship that she was completely unaware of.
Detectives discover Chenery Wickens has been leading a double life. By using his spiritualist charm, he's been exploiting a string of other women too.
He was a very plausible, charming man, particularly as he had joined the United Spiritualist Church, gained accreditation through them, and had taken to wearing a dog collar and calling himself Reverend. He claims that he could communicate with the dead through, apparently, a Native American spirit called Wild Fox. And there were many women, emotionally vulnerable, recently bereaved, who were ready to believe him. An opera singer, Chenery Wickens, had wanted £21,000 from her, claiming that he had prostate cancer. Well, he didn't. Secondly, an alternate therapist said that Chenery Wickens had told her that she should lend him money because he was going to divorce his wife and sell the house. Well, he didn't do that either. There was a whole series of cons that he had carried out, often at a time when he was also having sex with these women.
Marlene Thompson started up a local spiritualist group with Chenery Wickens, but it wasn't long before she too began to question his motives.
At some point, he asked every one of us what the value of our houses were, and he seems to pick on people, especially ladies, who have confided in him with problems within their marriage. Probably just after a year of us all meeting, everybody was beginning to fall out with each other. I did know that David was having affairs with several different girls at one time. He kept it pretty quiet. I knew because the girls confided in me what was going on.
Chenery Wickens even targeted Marlene.
David did ask me to have an affair with him. I was very tempted at that particular time because my marriage was a bit iffy at that particular time. It's strained, and it is that when David knows there's a bit of problems, when women are vulnerable, that's when he takes advantage of them. I was quite infatuated, I suppose, because he was 5 years younger, but I couldn't do that to my husband.
And to achieve his aims, the so-called respectable reverend seems happy to lie about his own marriage.
David told us all that he was divorced from Diane anyway, that she was a horrible person, she was very vicious, and they had got divorced. We discovered that he wasn't divorced, he was lying to us. With all the lying and the way he was talking of Diane, I decided then that circle had to close.
After speaking to his work pals at the Heritage Railway, the Lavender Line, detectives discover David's been spinning the same yarns.
He had been quite clear, as far as we knew, that his marriage was at an end. We knew he was still living with Diane, but as far as we knew, they were living, albeit in the same house, living apart. And as far as he told us, the marriage was ended, and she knew that.
They was talking about selling his house. So he's going to have to sell the house because him and his wife were splitting up.
But as far as Diane was concerned, they were happily married. Her husband explained the periods away from home womanising as time spent caring for his son, who had a brain injury. Detectives discover this is also a big lie.
Diane chose, consciously or otherwise, to turn a blind eye. She stayed loyal, she stayed over-trusting, and she let him get on with whatever he wanted to do.
After Diane's disappearance, her husband's lies show no sign of abating. Whilst out on bail, he keeps changing his story.
He kept saying that she had left him and had gone to Spain and she was going to stay there, live there. So that's how he explained why she was missing.
Obviously, for him to come up with she's gone off to Spain, when he had already said they'd gone off to London together for a meeting on the train, and she hadn't come back afterwards, it obviously began to make people think this chap is not telling the truth. Certainly the people on the Lavender Line had their own sinister theories about it.
Lying is an art form. It really is. You need to know what you said to different people at different times about different things. And it's incredibly difficult to keep that going for any period of time. But being proven a liar only proves you're a liar, does not prove you're a killer.
But 4 months after Diane's disappearance, just a stone's throw from the end of the Lavender Line, a dog walker makes a gruesome discovery.
Decomposed human remains were found yesterday in East Sussex.
No longer a missing persons inquiry, this was a full-blown murder inquiry.
Diane Chenery Wickens was reported missing by her husband on January the 24th this year.
4 months after Diane vanished, a body is uncovered in undergrowth, 10 miles from the family home. Diane's husband David has been exposed as a cheat and fraud. He's the prime suspect behind her disappearance.
a woman dog walker made the gruesome discovery, but very close to the lavender line where Chenery Wickens had worked.
Forensic investigators inspect the crime scene. Local farmer Michael Fordham arrives soon after.
We'd arranged to come and cut our crops with the combine harvester. We arrived at the entrance on the A26 to be met by the police cordon saying road shut, keep out. There were police vehicles everywhere. I believe there was tents and people in white coats. So yes, it was all very intensive police investigation. The body, I believe, was found in this wooded area underneath these big trees. So not too far away from anybody, but when the undergrowth in July is all up and growing, very difficult to see, and therefore the reason why she wasn't found for such a long time.
The body's later identified as that of Diane Chenery Wickens. Her missing person case is now officially a murder inquiry.
To have one and a body found in a field boundary here was quite shocking, really, and quite horrific. And this is a quiet hamlet. Don't expect a murder, but that's a sad fact of life.
It's the news that Duddleswell and beyond is dreading.
Just shock, I think. Just couldn't believe it. Just felt very sorry for her.
It was so horrific. She was very talented, beautiful. Just, you can't imagine something like that happening, and then you question everything.
We all obviously hoped that Diane would turn up safe and well in some way, so it was very shocking to find out that this lady had apparently been brutally murdered.
The discovery of the body suddenly propelled the entire case back into the headlines. A multi-talented BBC makeup artist murdered in a remote location and a wonderful idyllic country village backdrop. It was a perfect copy for the newspapers.
Meanwhile, scenes of crime officers are on the hunt for the tiniest of clues that will link Diane to her killer.
And you absolutely cannot rush forensic recovery because you only get the one opportunity. You're now looking at what evidence can Diane still give us, what evidence can we gather from the environment in which she was found, and how does that relate to our suspect?
No attempt had been made to dig even the shallowest of graves. She had just been discarded in undergrowth. So wildlife had got to her, and of course 4 months of decomposition meant that a pathologist had no chance of finding out the cause of death, how she had died. There were other fascinating quirks to the discovery. Diane's wedding ring and eternity ring were missing from her left hand.
They're very personal things to happen. And although not necessarily direct evidence as such, would tend to indicate that somebody who knew her was involved in her death.
And there's another bizarre twist to Diane's discovery.
So alongside the corpse was Diane's very distinctive cowboy boots. And the police had to ask themselves, would a stranger make such a seemingly significant gesture as this?
Whoever placed them had left the stretching devices to ensure that the boot kept its shape. They were still in situ, so clearly Diane hadn't worn them there.
Now, there's no way a stranger or a random attacker could have found these boots with these shoe stretchers still inside them. It had to come from someone who had access to the house and to the bedroom. This was a serious mistake made by the killer.
So it certainly changes the nature of the whole investigation.
The finger of suspicion points firmly towards Diane's husband, David, the only other person with access to their marital home. With the body found just a quarter of a mile from the lavender line, his volunteer work there also puts him in the frame.
It's so unusual for a killer to dispose of a body in a place they don't know. You will almost always find a connection from the killer back to the location of a body.
David Chenery Wickens is re-arrested immediately.
The husband of an Emmy Award-winning makeup artist faces further questioning by police today.
The shockwaves were all around the fact that David had become a member of the railway, had become part of the village community to that extent, had become a ordinary Joe in the pub, and that suddenly we have very good grounds now as villagers to believe that he was not what we thought.
Wouldn't have thought he'd be capable of doing it or anything. You know, totally out of character. I think there was a certain amount of shock. Really, you know, do I know this person?
Forensic teams once again pore over the couple's cottage.
The home address would have been considered primarily as a crime scene itself, and then secondary as a source of intelligence about where Diane had been, what happened to her, and to prove or disprove David's involvement as the killer.
Hidden in a small wooden box, officers uncover Diane's missing wedding and eternity rings. They're sent off to the forensics lab, and the results are incriminating.
The police were able to establish that the rings had minute traces of blood on them, and what's more, clear evidence that they'd been ripped from the fingers of the owner.
The forensic examination of Diane's jewellery was useful because it showed that she was wearing the jewellery when she was bleeding. But it certainly adds that little bit of evidence, that weight of evidence to say she was alive when she was wearing that jewellery and had suffered an attack.
As the rings were never found on the first top-to-bottom search of the home, police suspect David returned to his dead wife's body to retrieve them.
The sheer callousness of Chenery Wickens could be seen in the way that he'd clearly ripped rings from his dead wife's fingers, rings that she never ever took off, according to friends.
Investigators soon uncover the killer's plans for his wife's precious rings.
The missing rings from the fingers was set the police in motion immediately to go and make inquiries at local jewellery shops and pawnbrokers. And it wasn't long before the police found CCTV at a pawn shop showing Chenery Wickens trying to pawn some of his wife's jewellery. The fact that Chenery Wickens was able to pawn it for a mere measly £100 or so shows the depths of depravity and deceit that this man was capable of.
Over time, many more of the Reverend's sordid affairs come crawling out of the woodwork.
So the confirmation that Diane had been murdered ran through the village like a shock bolt. And those women who had known and had, particularly those who had sexual relations with Chenery Wickens, were now coming forward, having realised that the man who they had trusted and had been taken in by and comforted by was potentially a murderer. And a huge body of evidence quickly emerged for the police.
One ex-lover tells police of a very sinister phone call.
Very close to around the time that Diane disappeared, David spoke to an ex-girlfriend asking how you clean up blood.
Her first reaction was, well, how on earth did you get bloodstains on your carpet? To which she replied, oh, I had a terrible nosebleed. Well, at that time, she had no reason to disbelieve him. however implausible that may have sounded.
Was advised to use salt. Well, that type of evidence doesn't show David as a killer. It shows him making a phone call about how to clear up blood. It's when you start putting all of this evidence together, this very strong circumstantial evidence together, that begins to take things beyond reasonable doubt.
David Chenery Wickens appears in court charged with Diane's killing. And a date is set for him to stand trial.
This was crucial evidence for the police, taking the case beyond suspicions that Chenery Wickens was a con man, a charlatan who was adept at getting sex and money out of women, to evidence of Chenery Wickens being a potential murderer.
In Duddleswell, East Sussex, the spiritualist and charlatan David Chenery Wickens has been charged with the murder of his wife Diane. 8 months after her remains were found, her husband finally stands trial at Lewes Crown Court.
Chenery Wickens, despite the mountain of evidence against him, insisted on his innocence and pleaded not guilty to murder.
Individuals will have many different reasons for pleading not guilty. Some because they're clasping at anything to not be convicted. I think in David's case it was just, I don't want to be caught for this.
Court reporter Paul Cheston is there to see the spiritualist led into the dock.
I was at the trial for certain days. Throughout I sensed that Chenery Wickens was confident that he was going to get away with this case. He didn't seem worried by the amount of evidence that the police and the prosecution had assembled. It was very much a circumstantial case because no one had seen him obviously kill his wife or even dump the body. But even circumstantial cases can be very strong cases, and this was one.
Some people will go to court absolutely convinced that they are able to persuade a jury that there is enough doubt that they cannot be convicted. They have a warped sense of their own abilities. They have a warped sense of what did happen.
But the prosecution lays out the events leading to the night of Diane's murder. The day that she uncovers some home truths about her husband.
He was spending quicker than she was earning, and the debts were up to something like £17,000, and the shadow of the bailiffs was cast across their front door. She was getting very concerned. And when she found an itemised phone bill which showed not only the number of times that her husband was phoning various mistresses, but also the huge amount of money he was spending on gay chat rooms, and suddenly the worm turned.
It's believed Diane threatened to end their marriage. And the fake reverend responded with rage.
This was the moment when Chenery Wickens realised that she was worth more to him dead, when he could now sell the house and live the life he wanted to do, inheriting her estate, than alive, when all he had to look forward to was being thrown out of the house and a messy divorce.
Diane was a means to an end for him. And when his whole lifestyle was threatened, that's when Diane died.
Chenery Wickens murdered his wife as a spontaneous explosion of violence.
Though Diane's remains can't confirm how she died, the prosecution reveals the panicked call David makes to his mistress, asking how to clear up blood. After dumping Diane's body near his workplace, he then calculatingly leaves a message on her phone.
Wherever you are, just please get in contact.
As she lay dead.
Please, Diane, I'm going frantic here. Please phone me. Love you.
But the mask slips when the court hears from women and men who were invited over by Chenery Wickens for sex immediately after Diane's murder.
We came to know that he had a voracious sexual appetite. The prosecution's case was made up almost entirely with women who had been seduced by Chenery Wickens, whether for money or for sexual favours, who came forward and really gave a detailed picture of what this charlatan was like, with revealing insights. They gave evidence against him, some anonymously and others using their name.
Next, it's the Reverend's turn to take to the stand.
Chenery Wickens himself looked straight at the jury and told them about his great spiritualist beliefs and that he was a man of God. He laughed at the suggestion that he could be a murderer. He said that his beliefs and those of the church forbade any ill thoughts of all words or deeds, let alone a murder. And as a reverend in this church, he knew what would be waiting for him, presumably on the other side, should he ever do such a thing.
Now, he will explain to the jury, I had nothing to do with it, but I am the victim. And quite often when people take the stand, that's how they try and portray themselves, as the victim.
He tried to blackguard Diane's name by claiming that she was the one who was having all the affairs and not himself. He came up with a bizarre suggestion that Diane had not been murdered at all. She had taken her own life, that she had committed suicide because of the shame that she felt because of the mounting debts and because of their failed marriage.
But under cross-examination by the prosecution QC, the cool Chenery Wickens begins to crack.
By taunting him in the witness box, pressurising him, he was able to show Chenery Wickens losing his temper. And I'm sure this is when the jury thought, that's what happened that night. He lost his temper and he hit his wife.
Following a trial lasting more than a month, Chenery Wickens finally faces justice.
The jury were not taken in by any of the lies and charm and bluster from Chenery Wickens in the witness box and returned a unanimous verdict of guilty to murder.
The fake reverend is jailed for life, with a minimum of 18 years. Outside court, Diane's family responds to the verdict.
It wipes out once and for all the many lies that have been told about Diane, and it removes a dangerous, predatory charlatan from society.
The family never found out exactly how Diane died. The lack of remorse and the not guilty plea, I think, were all sentencing factors.
Diane's brutal killing has ever since haunted her village of Duddleswell and beyond.
You don't expect to have these sorts of incidents like this, and the shock waves that run through small communities like this are huge.
I wished I'd never met the man. I would never believe another word he said.
The whole thing was shocking because we obviously thought we knew these people, and then all of a sudden you find that you don't actually know anyone at all.
Murders don't happen in sleepy little country villages. To think that a husband can kill a wife, of years of marriage dissipated at a drop of a hat. It's a truly shocking image.